The Outlaws Motorcycle Club is an organization as feared as it is misunderstood. Founded in 1935, they've become one of the most notorious criminal groups in the world. With over 3,000 members across 43 countries, their name is synonymous through law enforcement agencies linked to drug trafficking, extortion, and deadly violence. But for the Outlaws, this isn't just about crime, it's about brotherhood. Yet, the truth is far murkier, and the reality is more dangerous than their myth. This is the story of the most feared outlaws to ever ride the streets. Number 10. Harry Joseph Bowman.
If they were going to assault members of another gang, like they did, and take a war wagon and 100 members with guns, you had to get permission from Harry Bowman before you did that, and he gave it.
Harry Joseph Bowman, better known as Taco, was born in Marysville, Michigan. In 1949, Bowman would go on to lead the Outlaws Motorcycle Club, shaping it into a global force of crime and terror. From 1984 to 1999, he was the undisputed president of the club, taking it from a Midwest operation to an international criminal empire with chapters in over 30 U.S. cities and across 20 countries. Under his leadership, the Outlaws weren't just a biker gang, they were a criminal powerhouse. Drug trafficking, prostitution, extortion, racketeering, you name it, the Outlaws were involved. But Bowman didn't stop there. He expanded the gang's reach across borders, forming alliances with some of the most dangerous groups around, including Satan's Choice, a Canadian biker gang. Together, they pushed drugs and firearms across the US-Canada border. If you think that's intense, Bowman didn't hesitate to work with the mafia too. He provided muscle for the mob, helping with their interests, and in return, he got a piece of their business. His connections made him untouchable, and his reputation grew. The violence under his reign is the stuff of legend. For Bowman, brutality was a business tool, necessary, efficient, and effective. Take, for example, the murder of Arthur Good Old Speed Vincent in 1982. Vincent was a former outlaw who'd gotten too big for his boots, running his mouth at a party. Bowman had him killed, execution style, and his body was dumped in a Florida ditch. That was just one of the many people who crossed Bowman's path and paid with their lives. From the gang's headquarters in Detroit, Bowman controlled illegal gambling, drugs, and loan sharking operations. But he wasn't the typical biker leader. No, Bowman didn't fit the scruffy, long-haired image many might expect. Instead, he kept a clean-cut look, suits, a well-maintained appearance, and a custom armored Cadillac. But don't be fooled, Bowman was every bit as dangerous as they come. In 1991, when one of his own members, Alan Greaser Wolf, cooperated with a grand jury, Bowman didn't hesitate. He ordered Wolf's brutal beating and expulsion from the Outlaws. One of the defining elements of Bowman's leadership was the war against the Hells Angels, a bitter rivalry that reached its peak during his presidency. But Bowman didn't just fight the Hells Angels head-on, he went after their allies too. In the early 90s, he targeted the Warlocks, a gang that had aligned itself with the Hells Angels. It was a bloody campaign of bombings, murders, and intimidation, all aimed at crushing any competition. If you crossed the Outlaws, you were marked, and Bowman made sure the consequences were deadly. But as all empires do, Bowman's reign eventually started to crumble. In 1997, he was indicted on a laundry list of charges, like racketeering, murder, drug trafficking, you name it. For 15 months, Bowman was on the run, evading capture, but the law caught up with him in 1999. After a long chase, he was arrested and later convicted in 2001. The sentence, 2 life terms, plus 83 years. The man who had once controlled a global criminal empire was finally behind bars. Bowman would spend the rest of his life in prison, and in 2019, his story ended when he died of cancer. Number 9. James Big Jim.
Much time in jail trying to make bonds. I spent more money in bonds and lawyer fees than people give me credit for.
James Big Jim Nolan was born in New Jersey around 1943 and quickly made a name for himself as the ruthless president of the South Florida chapter of the Outlaws Motorcycle Club. His path to infamy started in the mid-60s when he founded the Iron Cross Motorcycle Club in West Palm Beach. But in 1967, the game changed. That year, the Outlaws Motorcycle Club, based out of Chicago, sent a representative named Donald Deke Tanner to establish a Florida chapter. Nolan saw an opportunity and aligned himself with Tanner. Together, they merged various biker gangs, forming what would become the South Florida chapter of the Outlaws. From day one, the group was deeply involved in a variety of criminal activities, including prostitution, drugs, car theft, and violent assaults. But it was the brutal crime in 1967 that truly marked the Outlaws' rise to notoriety. An 18-year-old woman named Christine Dees was nailed to a tree after failing to pay a $10 debt. As the president of the South Florida chapter, Nolan expanded the gang's criminal empire. By the 1970s, Florida had become home to the largest concentration of outlaws in the U.S. Under Nolan's leadership, the chapter controlled prostitution. But as the drug trade grew, so did their involvement in narcotics and illegal gambling. Nolan forged ties with Colombian and Cuban cartels, trafficking in cocaine and methamphetamine. The Outlaws ran their operations with terrifying efficiency, holding total control over their turf. Rivalries, especially with the Hells Angels, soon turned deadly. In 1974, Nolan ordered the execution of 3 Hells Angels members who had come to Florida. They were lured to an Outlaws clubhouse, bound and executed before being dumped in a quarry. Though the bodies were discovered and Nolan faced trial, he managed to escape conviction. Nolan's cruelty escalated from there. His control over women, often trafficked by the club, became even more severe. One woman, Joyce Carlene, was tortured after refusing to bring him a beer. She was raped, beaten, and then sold into prostitution. Another woman, Naomi Sinokub, tried to escape and was murdered to prevent her from talking. Throughout the 70s and 80s, Nolan's reign of terror continued. He ran prostitution rings and drug operations, even from behind bars. After his release, he resumed his criminal activities in Arizona. Nolan's violent past finally caught up with him in 1989 when he was convicted on charges of racketeering, conspiracy, and murder. Sentenced to 50 years, Nolan served 26 years before his release in 2016. Number 8. Mario Parente. Mario Parente grew up in the tough, gritty neighborhood of Hamilton, Ontario, under the shadow of the Niagara Escarpment, a place locals call the Mountain. It was the kind of place that shaped hard men. Mario joined Satan's Choice Motorcycle Club in 1967, just a teenager, and took the name The Wop, a slur he wore as armor. By 1969, he was already known as the toughest guy in the Hamilton chapter. Cops said he wore a special patch, one that meant he'd either been charged with or convicted of murder. By the time he became president of the Hamilton chapter, he was a feared figure in the local biker scene. He once had a friendship with fellow member Stadnik, but that quickly soured when Mike blocked Stadnik's membership, claiming he was too short. In 1977, when part of Satan's Choice patched over to the Outlaws, Mike and his crew followed suit. From there, things escalated fast. A biker war broke out in 1978 between the Outlaws and the Hells Angels, and the violence was relentless. Bodies hit the ground, ambushes were common, and one day, Mike's chapter killed 5 members of a rival gang connected to the Angels, forcing them to shut down. In 1983, Mike's temper flared again. He spotted a Hells Angels jacket on a Greyhound bus window and without hesitation rallied a crew to chase the bus down. They caught up at a donut shop in Wawa and the gunfire rang out. No one died, but there were injuries. Mike denied his involvement, but reports pointed to him being at the scene. Either way, he was charged with attempted murder. While awaiting trial, Mike's life didn't slow down. In 1984, a drunk thug named Jimmy Lewis showed up at a strip club where Mike worked as a bouncer. After a confrontation, the Lewis brothers came back looking for a fight. When a gun was waved around, Mike fired a shotgun. Jimmy was killed, and Mike claimed it was self-defense. The court wasn't fully convinced, but didn't convict him of murder either. He got 30 months for manslaughter. Around this time, rumors spread about Mike laundering money with a mob-linked businessman. In 1996, the police arrested him in a major operation, Project Charlie, charging him with conspiracy to sell cocaine and making death threats. While in jail, an inmate tried to blind him with a sharpened toothbrush. Mike fought him off, refused to cooperate with cops, and stuck to his code of silence, no snitching. That same year, a hit was ordered on Mike's life, but it never went through. Despite everything, Mike continued to rise through the ranks, eventually becoming the national president of the Outlaws in Canada. Mike's influence kept the Hells Angels from gaining a stronghold in Ontario for years, but that all changed in 2000 when Stadnik orchestrated a massive recruitment effort, drawing nearly every Ontario biker gang into the Hells Angels fold.
It was a methodical campaign against the people they thought had come into their territory.
Some outlaws even flipped, but Mike stayed loyal. He made a call to the US president of the Outlaws, who reached out to Sonny Barger, the Angels' top boss. They agreed to back off, avoiding an all-out war. In 2002, Mike faced Project Retire, a long legal battle that saw most other outlaws take plea deals.
They may or may not enjoy riding motorcycles. The bottom line for these guys are, how much money can we put into our pockets?
By 2009, most of Ontario's outlaws were either convicted or had turned state's witness. Mike, still defiant, quit the club in anger, feeling betrayed by the very organization he helped build. He tried to get his seized property back. After years in court, he was awarded $238.97. Number 7. John W. Bushman. John Flapper. Bushman was no ordinary biker. In 1980, Bushman, along with another outlaw, found himself convicted of one of the most brutal crimes in Milwaukee, raping and savagely beating a young woman in the Outlaws clubhouse. But that was just one chapter in a long history of violent crimes. You see, Bushman was tied to far more than just a few criminal acts. He was at the center of a car theft ring that spanned across state lines. With his hands deep in the muck of stolen vehicles, Bushman ran a chop shop where stolen cars were stripped, rebuilt, and sold off as fresh new rides.
In 1974, they were involved in well over a dozen murders here just in Broward County alone, and I think we've put together facts and figures that can show over 100 murders just in the state of Florida.
But that's not all. In the year was 1974, and Larry Anstett, a 15-year-old paperboy, walked down North 83rd Street with a bag full of newspapers over his shoulder. Something caught his eye, a box on the roof of an abandoned car. Curious, Larry walked over, reaching for the box. But as soon as he touched it, the box exploded, instantly killing Larry in a horrifying blast. Seconds after the blast, a pickup truck sped off, and according to a witness, 2 men were seen in the truck with a shovel and a broom sticking out of the back. One of them, it turned out, was Michael Vermillier, the president of the Heavens Devils Motorcycle Club, a rival gang to the Outlaws. Vermillier was certain the bombing was meant for him. He had testified against 2 members of the Outlaws months before, and since then, his life had been threatened multiple times. But this time, the wrong person had paid the price. But for one detective, Roger Hinterthur, the name that kept coming up in every investigation was John Flapper Bushman. It was soon discovered that Bushman and his crew, including some of the most notorious members of the Outlaws, had been involved in stealing explosives, which were used in a failed attempt to kill Vermillier. The bomb that killed Larry Anstett was no accident. It was meant for a rival biker, but a mix-up led to the tragic death of an innocent teenager.
Next week's supposed to get torch. I'm going in there next week. Come hell or high water. We got to pretty much figure out how we're going to do it.
Bushman had taken TNT from a quarry and assembled the bomb in the garage where they dismantled stolen cars. The morning of the bombing, Wadsworth had even witnessed Bushman and his partner Joe Stoll discussing the bomb, and later, Bushman casually told him that a newspaper kid got killed. Other witnesses had disappeared, and some of the key players, like Stoll and a man named Cliff Machan, simply vanished from the scene, suspected of having been silenced. It seemed that Machan, who had once worked with Bushman in the car theft ring, knew too much and had paid the price. In the end, the case against Bushman never fully materialized. As for Bushman, he managed to avoid conviction, moving to Florida and continuing his life as if nothing had ever happened. Number 6. Kevin O'Neill. Kevin Spike O'Neill rose to infamy as a leader in the Outlaws Motorcycle Club, one of the most feared and notorious biker gangs. His journey to power, however, wasn't exactly clean-cut. Initially, O'Neill led a rival gang called the Booze Runners, which was on the brink of becoming a full Outlaws chapter. Under O'Neill's leadership, the Booze Runners quickly earned a reputation for violence, and it wasn't long before they were officially inducted into the Outlaws with O'Neill as president. The 1990s were a brutal time in the outlaw biker world, and O'Neill was right in the thick of it.
Turns out that they killed him. They eliminated him because they thought he had become a snitch.
One of his most infamous acts was the bombing of the Hell's Henchman clubhouse in Rockford, Illinois, in 1990, a stunt that guaranteed the Booze Runners' place in the Outlaws. But things escalated quickly. In 1994, O'Neill orchestrated the cold-blooded murder of Lamont Monty Mathias, the president of the Hell's Henchman Motorcycle Club's Rockford chapter. O'Neill believed Mathias was responsible for a shooting that had injured Outlaws Chicago chapter president Peter Greased Lightning Rogers, and he exacted his revenge with calculated precision. O'Neill sent David Wolf, a man looking to join the Outlaws, to carry out the hit. Armed with a .45 caliber pistol, Wolf stalked Mathias to his motorcycle parts shop. There, he shot, bludgeoned, and stabbed Matthias to death. The brutality didn't stop there. O'Neill also instructed Wolfe to kill Matthias's girlfriend if she witnessed the murder, though she wasn't present when the crime took place. Afterward, O'Neill rewarded Wolfe with a paid weekend at a hotel, but the violence didn't end with that killing. Later, in 1994, O'Neill and 2 other outlaws tried to murder Eddie Murphy, a rival gang member, by running his car off the road and attempting to force him into their van. O'Neill and his crew were arrested and charged with gun violations, but this was only a prelude to bigger troubles. In the end, O'Neill was convicted of racketeering and sentenced to life in federal prison. His conviction was part of a major government crackdown on the outlaws, targeting their violent and organized criminal activities. Number 5. Orville Cochran. Orville Orvie the Anvil, Cochran was no stranger to trouble. As the leader of the Chicago Outlaws Motorcycle Club's South Side chapter, known as the Mothership for being the club's original base, Cochran ran the show in the gritty world of biker gangs. But his reign came with a dark reputation. Throughout the 1990s, he was at the center of a violent rivalry with the Hells Angels, one of the fiercest rivalries in the biker world. Cochran's criminal activities weren't just about the turf wars, he was deeply involved in some brutal gangland murders, though he was never officially convicted of them. There were whispers around the Chicago streets about his involvement in the deaths of several Hells Angels members and even some of his own. There were murders tied to power struggles over control of the South Side chapter of the Outlaws, including the killings of figures like Michael Mad Mike Quayle, Jack 4x4 Castle, and Thomas Westside Tommy Stimac.
You murder people and you go into bars and beat everybody up, you're going to get law enforcement's interest.
The feds, even after his conviction, still have Cochran on their radar for those unsolved homicides. After a 16-year run as a fugitive, hiding from the law, Cochran's luck finally ran out in 2017. He was arrested for something as mundane as shoplifting a back brace at a supermarket. After being arrested, he pled guilty to racketeering charges in 2018, which tied him to the violent and illegal activities of the Outlaws. He was sentenced to 5 years in prison, a far cry from the life of power and fear he had once commanded. For those 16 years, he was on the run. He wasn't living it up. He was barely scraping by, doing odd jobs like landscaping and home repairs just to survive. He spent his winters in Arizona and his summers in Chicago, staying out of sight, constantly worried about being recognized. His health deteriorated during this time, and his personal life fell apart. He had no contact with his family, his mother died, and his children grew up without him. His fiancée was left in the dark, and he kept away from her to keep her safe from the fallout of his criminal life. In 2021, after serving part of his sentence, Cochran was granted early release because of his failing health and COVID-19 related provisions under the First Step Act. Despite objections from federal prosecutors who still considered him a threat, he was set free and returned to Chicago's South Side. Number 4. Randall Madman Miller. Randall Madman Miller is one of the club's most infamous enforcers. Miller was responsible for some of the most brutal and chilling crimes tied to the gang. In 2000, he was handed 2 life sentences for his role in a wide-ranging racketeering case that included murder, bombings, and countless acts of violence. Miller, who sat silently in court when the verdict was delivered, is now admitting to the gruesome murders that were part of his conviction, including the high-profile slayings of Morris and Ruth Gauger in McHenry County, Illinois, back in 1993. The Gaugers, who ran a small farm and motorcycle parts business, were killed in what was supposed to be a robbery. Miller slit Morris Gauger's throat, leaving him to bleed out in his shop, while Ruth was murdered by an accomplice and left to die on the floor of her small rug shop. In the aftermath, their son Gary was wrongfully arrested, convicted, and sentenced to death for the crime, a case that would only be overturned when Miller's accomplice, James Preacher Schneider, came forward with the truth. But the Gauger murders weren't Miller's only acts of brutality. He was also convicted for the killing of Donald Domino Wagner, a marijuana dealer whom Miller lured to a remote location and executed with a shot to the head. The murder was tied to a drug deal gone wrong, further cementing Miller's reputation for extreme violence. In addition, he was implicated in the deaths of rival gang members, including Hells Angel Michael Quayle, who was killed during a violent confrontation between the Outlaws and the Hells Angels in New York. Miller has now, in a desperate plea for compassion and release due to his declining health, confessed to the crimes in a letter to the judge. In his plea for release, Miller compares his situation to that of other outlaws, like Randy Yeager, who served far less time despite fleeing and living in Mexico for years. Number 3. Jack Rosger.
This was part of a nationwide effort to arrest high-ranking leaders in the Outlaws gang, including their national president, 53-year-old Jack Rosger.
Jack Rosger kept a pretty low profile for someone who was, according to federal authorities, the leader of the Outlaws Motorcycle Club. Operating out of Milwaukee, Rosger reportedly ordered attacks on rival gang members while keeping his personal life under wraps. His reputation in the club was enough to earn him the nickname Milwaukee Jack. Despite his status in the criminal world, Rosger's public image was surprisingly clean. His lawyer even described him as a hard-working guy, running a small trucking business and living a fairly quiet life. But the picture painted in legal documents was a far cry from this regular guy image. The indictment filed against Rosger and 26 other outlaws is full of charges of attempted murder, kidnapping, robbery, drug dealing, extortion, and much more. Rosger, fully aware of the path he was on, once told an undercover agent he expected to end up behind bars, just like the 2 previous leaders of the Outlaws. By 2006, he had become the national leader. Despite his criminal ties, Rosger kept a respectable image. His trucking business was his front, and he worked hard to maintain it. Publicly, Rosger didn't hide his affiliation with the Outlaws. In fact, he and other members even sued Milwaukee police for what they claimed was harassment, going as far as accusing officers of violating their rights. Their suit, though, ended without much consequence. Authorities believe he directed attacks from Milwaukee, including a retaliatory shooting in Georgia, and later a demand for revenge on the Hells Angels in Florida. In 2007, after an outlaw was shot outside a strip club, Rosger allegedly gave the green light for retribution. Number 2. Big Pete James.
I mean, I had 2 positions. I was the president of my own chapter, and I was vice president of the region, and head of the COC, which had 40 support clubs. So totally between the 40 support clubs, the 6 outlaw chapters, and there was probably 500 guys.
Big Pete James wasn't your typical outlaw. While most people in the biker world gained power through muscle, Pete used his mind. Born and raised in Chicago, he wasn't exactly raised in the world of motorcycles or crime, but it was a life he chose. A graduate in political science, Pete had the kind of brain that could outthink most generals, and he applied that thinking to building one of the most feared and respected motorcycle networks in Chicago. By 1991, Pete had bought his first Harley, a game-changing decision that would kick off a wild ride to the top of the outlaw biker world. Over time, Pete's network grew into one of the largest and most formidable in the city. He commanded 6 chapters of the Outlaws and 40 support clubs, with nearly 500 members who looked to him for leadership. But what made Pete different from the rest was how he used strategy, not just force, to keep everything running smoothly. Where others fought over turf with guns, Pete organized his network with precision, making sure there was always a backup plan and never a need to resort to violence. He even set up secret meeting spots, each one known only to a specific chapter, keeping everything running under the radar. His approach was clever, always prepared, always cautious, and always thinking of the next move. Even when life threw him a curveball like a cancer diagnosis in 2013, Pete didn't fall apart. He approached his health battle the same way he'd handled his biker business, with careful planning and determination. Number 1. James Lee.
I think most of them will tell you it's better to be feared than respected. It was explained to me, if we sense any fear, we will act like a pack of piranhas.
James Lee Frank Wheeler was the international president of the Outlaws Motorcycle Club, and in 2003 he found himself facing a serious trial in Tampa, Florida. Federal prosecutors hit him with charges that accused him of running a violent biker gang, involved in everything from murder and bombings to drug trafficking. He was specifically charged with orchestrating the killings of rival bikers in places like Indiana and New York. If he was found guilty, Wheeler was looking at a lifetime behind bars. The case got even more intense when Carl J. Warnecke, a former Outlaws member, decided to testify against Wheeler. Warnecke spilled the details of what life was really like inside the club. He described a brutal culture of violence where members exacted revenge with bombings and murders. Warnecke even went as far as talking about a deadly clash with the Hells Angels in New York and a grenade attack on one of their leaders' homes. His testimony was aimed at reducing his own sentence, which was a double life term, but it also gave the jury a look into the club's operations and Wheeler's role in all the violence. The evidence and testimonies stacked up, and Wheeler was convicted. He became the second international president of the Outlaws to be convicted in Tampa. He was sentenced to 16.5 years in prison for racketeering, drug distribution, and obstruction of justice. The case was built in part on deals with other Outlaws members who flipped on their president in exchange for lighter sentences. Wheeler's criminal history went way back to 1967, and his conviction was just one more example of the successful federal crackdown on the Outlaws in the Tampa area.